Cassady Clams. The poet was giving directions. I was driving the car. Miss America was gazing at the creatures out the window. The zoo was everywhere. "Go straight, then turn at the next light," the poet said. "I haven't seen light in years," I replied. "Huh, big deal," said Mr. Rick. "You always try and be so apocalyptic. Lighten up, Jake. You're supposed to be going to a party." "You know what the Mickey Mantle switcher was?" I said. "No." "That's when you send your flanker down and out to the right, and the Sling and Sam was down and out to the left. It was political alley football in the old neighborhood, just like my poetry." "When it comes to your poetry, my friend, nobody knows what you're talking about." "I just make available what nobody knows," I replied. "You mean what nobody knows or cares to know," Mr. Rick said. Mr. Rick and I were having one of those dialogues Mr. Rick said people really didn't have. I turned into the courtyard. The courtyard had bluebirds perched in yellow trees surrounded by a deep, enchanting mist. There was the vibrant smell of rain and life's movie in your face, if you were willing to push the button. We finally arrived at the mansion of the Townhouse Tribe, a modern complex, strictly post-war. As we entered the foyer, I was surrounded by a stainless steel motif that pushed me one step closer to the new gods. "I hope this isn't a formal affair," said Mr. Rick. "And I hope they don't mind that you brought us." "This is a literary party," the poet said. "There is no hope. Just sound good." "And look good," Miss America added. We checked our attire as a lovely young blonde answered the door. She had the line and clarity of a 50s color movie resonating in ambiance of pure cinemascope. As she welcomed us in, we all did the gawk, except for Miss America, who shot her a black and white 8mm all her own. The party was small, intimate, and loaded. The ladies were rich in ego-piercing heels. The men overflowing in large white careers. It was pre-plague awareness, and everyone was looking to poke or be poked. The poet magnetically went to his connection. His connection lounged near a cactus by a curtain. Bach was playing everywhere. I flowed through the dining room into the hot kitchen. In the hot kitchen, the host and I were introduced. He gave me a funny look, a who's who, as in, "Who are you?" It was the literary freeze-out. But I picked up on it, and in my best apocalyptic voice said in slow motion, "I once bowled with a Buddhist from Bali in Boulder." My tone hit home, and the host accepted me as a real artist after that. Once past the host test, I sat near a woman who had eventually come to grips with the legalization of prostitution. I knew by the way she crossed her legs and velvetly asked me where I was from. "Chicago," I said. "Do you make your age?" she asked. "21K forever," I said. It touched her arrogance. "I'm a writer who's recently discovered that fall is a hypnotism," she said. "Oh, really? I'm a writer too, but I'm hypnotized all year round." She gave up her starlit eyes. "What's Chicago like?" "It's a big flat space where everything changes and stays the same." She twitched her nose like a tough Peter Pan. "You're a funny one," she said. "So are you." Two funny ones in the same place. How about that? Yeah. She hit on a camel the way youth hits on a camel before the French kiss. In the background, the host pulled the poet in the kitchen, where I overheard him say he was preparing some Neal Cassady clams. "Original recipe?" the poet asked. "Of course," the host replied. I couldn't contain myself. so I maneuvered into position. "What's a Neal Cassady clam?" They both stared at me strangely. "It's a deep gene dish that keeps the memory alive," the poet replied. "The clams sure smelled good. True blue. Gave you a feeling like this blues guy back home. He played harp like a wounded angel and healed you from within." The splendid aroma of the clams drifted over to Mr. Rick, who was sitting by a woman who looked like Ingrid Bergman. Their dialogue seemed intense, so I zoned into their conversation. "I just hope I make it to the year 2000, Mr. Rick said. 2000 means nothing to me, Ingrid replied. I live in the past. Think Germany will reunite, Mr. Rick said. Think the U.S. will ever be free, Ingrid replied. The steam from the clams was making everything intense and holographic. As I leaned further in, I heard Ingrid tell Rick multiple stories that had occurred in the snow. One in particular was about her second husband, who dropped dead in the snow when a starling flew into his temple on their patio. Birds, Mr. Rick said. Patios, Ingrid replied. The Neal Cassady clams were now being served. I took two and peered through a painting. The painting had a November moon highlighted by the dance of dead leaves on a big city pavement. I was lost in picture magic until a voice whispered in my ear. I'm Lada. Lada. It was the breath of a ballerina. Lada. She said it as if she could rule the world with it. As I turned to see her, I felt close to Dr. Zhivago. This was a clear case of the voice matching the body. She was a classic, a natural, a gorgeous killer God usually kept to himself. We both had clams. I love you, she said. I was stunned. I'm only kidding, she said. I was silent. Did you know when people say they're only kidding, they're not kidding, she said. I was mesmerized. We hopped a roller coaster to the burgundy sofa. Near the burgundy sofa, an old genius was hitting on some hash as young artisans flocked around him hoping some wisdom would rub off. Lada and I were making unity plans for later. I remembered the poet once said, later is now. Just as we were about to take off, Miss America spotted us and pried me free. Then she forced me to dance and told me I should be hanging out in the section of important men. By the time our hully-gully ended, Lada had disappeared and Miss America pointed me in the right direction. I've got a new book coming out, I said to an important man. Oh, how nice, he distantly replied. It takes place in endlessness, and everyone's in love with somebody else, so no one's really in love. Oh, a true love story, he said. I guess. You thinking about the movie rights? Why, are you a producer? I'm a janitor, he said. I pushed the life button in front of my nose. My movie whirred. Important men faded. The doorbell rang and Lady CinemaScope let in a midlife man equipped with a Jack Kennedy image. Through private sources, I found out that he was an award-winning religious editor from The Sun. The host brought him some clams. I sat near him, and for eons, we warmly chatted about space and St. Paul. I told him I once was a divinity student who gradually descended to Earth. He told me Joe Stalin was once a divinity student that gradually ascended to hell. Never peak, always plateau. That's my motto, I said, quoting Mr. Rick. He smiled and asked how long the party would last. I told him as long as the clams. They lasted forever.